The screen door slammed shut behind Marcus Hayes as he set down his duffel bag, the sound echoing through the empty house like a gunshot. 3 years. 3 long years he'd been gone, and now standing in the doorway of his own home, he felt like a stranger. The living room still smelled faintly of his late wife Sarah's lavender candles, though dust had settled over everything like a gray blanket of forgotten time. His daughter Emma's toys were scattered across the floor exactly where he remembered them, frozen in time like a museum exhibit of the life he'd left behind. But Emma wasn't here. She was 2 states away, living with Sarah's mother, because Marcus had made what he thought was the only choice he could make when Sarah died suddenly from an aneurysm while he was deployed. He'd let his mother-in-law take Emma, just temporarily he'd told himself, just until he finished his tour. But temporary had stretched into years, and now his 5-year-old daughter barely knew his voice on the phone. If you're already feeling the weight of Marcus's story, if you want to know what happens next, please hit that like button right now. And if you believe in second chances and the power of community, subscribe to this channel because I promise you, this story will remind you why human connection matters more than anything else in this world. Now let me tell you about the neighbor who said one sentence that would change everything. Marcus walked through each room of the house mechanically, his combat boots leaving prints in the dust. The nursery he'd painted yellow before Emma was born still had the same cheerful sun decals on the walls, mocking him with their brightness. Sarah's closet still held her clothes, and he found himself pressing his face into one of her sweaters, breathing in deep, hoping for some trace of her. But there was only the musty smell of fabric that had sat untouched for too long. He was 32 years old, a decorated sergeant, a man who'd led soldiers through some of the most dangerous missions in Afghanistan, but standing here in this house, he felt like he was drowning in his own failure. The plan was simple, he'd told himself during the endless flight home. He'd get the house ready, prove to his mother-in-law Patricia that he was stable and capable, then bring Emma home where she belonged. He'd already lined up a job at a security firm in town. He had his disability check coming in regularly, enough to cover the mortgage and then some. On paper, everything looked fine. But papers didn't account for the nightmares that woke him up at 3 in the morning, or the way his hands shook when he heard loud noises, or the crushing loneliness that made him feel like he was still in that desert, surrounded by people but utterly alone. That first night back, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat on the couch with all the lights on, drinking coffee and making lists. Clean the house. Fix the broken step on the front porch. Paint Emma's room, buy new sheets, new towels, new everything. Make it feel like a home again instead of a mausoleum. By the time the sun came up, he had 3 pages of tasks written down and his hands were cramping from gripping the pen so tightly. He didn't hear the knock at first, so lost in his own thoughts that the sound didn't register. The second knock was louder, more insistent. When Marcus opened the door, he found himself looking at a woman about his age, maybe a bit younger, with dark curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and paint-stained overalls. She held a casserole dish wrapped in a red checkered towel, and her smile was warm but cautious, like she wasn't sure of her welcome. Behind her, Marcus could see the house next door, the one that had been empty when he'd deployed. Someone had planted a garden in the front yard since then, filled with sunflowers that turned their faces toward the morning light. "Hi," she said, and her voice had a gentle quality that immediately put him on edge because he wasn't used to gentleness anymore. "I'm Rachel Chen. I moved in next door about 18 months ago. I saw your truck pull in yesterday and thought you might appreciate a hot meal. It's chicken pot pie, nothing fancy, but it's homemade." She extended the dish toward him, and Marcus found himself automatically taking it, the warmth seeping through the towel into his hands. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's kind of you. I'm Marcus Hayes." He stood there awkwardly, knowing he should probably invite her in or say something else, but the words wouldn't come. Social interaction felt like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Rachel didn't seem offended by his brevity. "I know this is probably overwhelming, coming back to an empty house. If you need anything, even just someone to talk to, I'm right next door. I work from home most days, so I'm usually around." She started to turn away, then paused, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "And Marcus, welcome home. I mean that." He watched her walk back to her house, her garden boots leaving prints in the dewy grass, and felt something stir in his chest that might have been gratitude or might have been the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He ate the pot pie for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that day, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in 3 years. The next few days passed in a blur of cleaning and repairs. Marcus threw himself into the physical work with the same intensity he'd brought to every mission, as if he could somehow scrub away the years of absence by sheer force of will. He tore up the old carpets that held too many memories and refinished the hardwood floors underneath. He painted every room, choosing colors he thought Emma might like, soft blues and greens instead of the beige and white that Sarah had preferred. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, replaced the broken tiles in the kitchen, and spent an entire day just washing windows until they sparkled. Rachel appeared periodically, always with some excuse. She brought over tools he didn't have, offered to hold the ladder while he cleaned out the gutters, and showed up one afternoon with a box of Emma's old toys that the previous owners had apparently left in her garage. "I figured these belonged to you," she said, and Marcus had to turn away quickly because his eyes were suddenly burning with tears he refused to shed. He learned that Rachel was a graphic designer who'd moved here after a divorce, looking for a fresh start in a small town where the pace was slower and people still waved at each other on the street. She'd bought the house next door for almost nothing because it needed work, and she'd spent the last year and a half fixing it up herself, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos. She had a rescue dog named Biscuit, a 3-legged golden retriever who'd apparently decided that Marcus's yard was just as good as Rachel's for doing his business. "I'm really sorry about that," Rachel said when she caught Biscuit in the act one morning. "He has no concept of property boundaries." But Marcus found he didn't mind. There was something comforting about the dog's presence, the way he'd come limping over for pets without any expectation or judgment, just simple animal affection. 2 weeks after Marcus came home, he finally called Patricia to tell her he was ready. The conversation went about as well as he'd expected, which was to say, not well at all. Patricia listened to his plans in silence, and then delivered the blow he'd been dreading. "I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus. Emma has been through too much already. She's finally settled here, she has friends at her preschool, she's happy. I can't just uproot her because you've decided you're ready to be a father again." "I've always been her father," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level. "I never stopped being her father. I was serving our country, Patricia." Sarah understood that. "Sarah's not here," Patricia replied, and her voice was sharp with old grief and older resentment. "Sarah's not here because you weren't here when she needed you. She had a headache that day. Did you know that she told me she felt strange, dizzy? But she was alone with Emma, and she pushed through it because that's what she always did. By the time I got there, she was already gone. So forgive me if I don't think you've earned the right to disrupt Emma's life again." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each one finding the soft places where his guilt lived. He'd carried those same thoughts with him through every mission, every sleepless night in the desert. If he'd been home, maybe Sarah would have told him about the headache. Maybe he would have insisted she go to the hospital. Maybe she'd still be alive. The what-ifs were endless and tortuous, and Patricia knew exactly where to aim them. "I want to see her," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Please. She's my daughter." "We'll discuss it," Patricia said finally. "But I'm not making any promises. Emma's well-being comes first, Marcus. Not your need to ease your conscience." She hung up before he could respond, and Marcus stood there holding the phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him. He didn't remember walking outside. He didn't remember sitting down on the front porch steps or putting his head in his hands. But that's where Rachel found him 20 minutes later, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs that he'd been holding back for 3 years. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down next to him on the step, close enough that he could feel her presence but not touching, giving him space to fall apart without an audience demanding explanations. When he could finally speak, the whole story came pouring out. Sarah's death, his decision to let Emma go with Patricia, the years of telling himself it was temporary, and now this, the realization that he might